Hi, so today we're going to be doing a lesson on using a graphing calculator to find zeros of a quadratic equation. So first we're going to review the known methods of solving quadratic equations. We can do so algebraically by factoring, computing the square, quadratic formula, or graphing by hand. And so each one of these methods can be used, but there are certain limitations to each one. So for factoring and graphing by hand, those two only work in special cases when the b values and the c values of the given quadratic equation allow for that to happen. For completing the square and quadratic formula, both of those methods are quite time consuming and they give you irrational solutions many times. And so it just becomes very inconvenient to use those methods at all points in time. So, as an example, we're given the quadratic equation x squared minus 4x minus 8 equals 0. And so we're using the algebraic methods that we know. We can't factor this equation. We see that because there are no two factors of negative 8, which add up to negative 4. And so factoring and graphing by hand won't be useful to find zeros. If we try to complete the square, we see that it's possible, and it takes 6 steps, 6 algebraic steps in order to do that. And we get an irrational answer. Similarly with the quadratic formula, it takes us 5 steps, so one less step in completing the square, and obviously we could end up with the same um, irrational answer. So neither one of these um, methods are particularly, hmm, I guess, nice when we want to solve this equation. So luckily we can use a graphing calculator to do that. And so in our case, we're going to be using the Desmos graphing calculator, which can be found at desmos.com/calculator. And really, it's only 3 steps to solve a quadratic formula for its zeros, and only one of those steps is, or one of those steps is sometimes not even necessary. So step one, after you obviously go to the graphing calculator, you're going to type in your equation into the bar on the left side of the screen. Step two, you can adjust the window until you can see enough of the graph. And step three, you simply click on the points where the graph crosses the x-axis. And these are your zeros. So if you go to the website, desmos.com/calculator, this is the screen that you'll see. And you'll see on the left-hand side that we have a bar, and that's the bar that you're going to type it into our equation. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see some other options, but most importantly, you see the plus and the minus option. That'll allow you to zoom in or zoom out on the field if necessary. And you can also use your calculator just to pan around the screen, the graph, if and when necessary. So in our case, we're going to type in, this is our step one, we're going to type in our equation, x squared minus 4x minus 8 equals 0. And then we automatically see that um, a graph pops up. Now, even though this graph looks like two parallel lines, it is in fact one equation. If we were to zoom out, we'll be able to see that it is one parabola. But for our purposes, we don't really care much about that. We just care about finding the zeros. So you can see in our image here that we have already 2 points where the graph intersects the x-axis. So that's all we really care about in this case. So we don't need to change our field or view field or anything. We can just skip right from step one to step three. So we're going to click on the 2 points where the graph intersects the x-axis, and we see that very clearly. And we see that our x values are negative 1.464 and 5.464. And so these two would be our zeros. And just in those three steps, you were able to use the graphing calculator um, in order to find the zeros for that equation. A process that's much faster, much simpler than the algebraic processes of computing the square or um, using the quadratic formula. Also, we should note that we can't really solve this, graph this by hand, just because of the fact that the zeros are irrational. So if you were to try to graph this by hand, um, not knowing the zeros ahead of time, we wouldn't really be able to have a good approximation of where to intersect the x-axis. So there you go. That's how you use a graphing calculator, the Desmos online calculator, in order to find the zeros of a quadratic formula. Thank you.